Tell me about growing up Mormon.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in an Orthodox Mormon family, which means they were very strict. Um, at the time as a child, I thought all families were like that. I didn't realize that some families were less strict about the rules. But I also think growing up in California, our family treated it more like a religion than a culture, whereas like in Utah, it's more like people are socially Mormon and not necessarily like deeply religiously Mormon. So my family, through my mother's side, the Mormonism goes back pretty much to the beginning of the church.
What's
And
the
I
difference?
had,
What's the difference between Orthodox Mormon and like not that? Is there another term? Just regular Mormon?
yeah, I would say Orthodox, or as far as being put on Mormonism, is a more recent thing. I think as more people are leaving and recognizing the differences. So I would say like an Orthodox Mormon family does everything. Like the parents were married in the temple. They go to church every Sunday. If you're in high school, you go to church before school every day. You do, um, you're either in, if you're a girl, you're involved in the Young Women's Program, which involves additional meetings. If you're a boy, you're in the Young Men's Program, and then most likely, at least at that point, the Boy Scouts were very deeply connected with the Mormon Church. So most boys were also part of the Boy Scouts. Um, you don't drink coffee, you don't drink alcohol. If you've gone to the temple, you have special underwear that you wear.
Like what? What kind of underwear?
It's like it was supposed to be like protective, but and to kind of keep modesty. So it kind of shows the areas of your body that actually can be seen as opposed to not seen.
Okay.
Um, so it's like for men, it's more like a t-shirt and then almost like long boxer shorts. And then for women, it's like um, I think they had different kinds, but the ones that my mom wore were like this silky fabric, and it was just like this lacy like undershirt and underwear, but they were like long, but you had to wear your bra on top of the garments. So the garments always had to be touching your skin.
How did you feel about being Mormon when you were young? Like really young, like
It's
under 10?
fine. Like as a child, I think because it was so much a part of my family, like all of my cousins were Mormon. I had a very large extended family. My mom had four siblings, and my grandmother had like six siblings. So I had a lot of second cousins and first cousins. So it seemed normal. Um, in school, I did feel kind of like the odd kid out because we grew up in a small town, and so there most of the Mormon people in our town were my family. Like there weren't that many people who weren't already my cousins who were in the church. Um, but at the time, it just I believed it because it was what I was taught from a really young age. So I thought it was fine. Like I didn't think anything of it, and probably until I left, like I moved away and then started questioning it at that point. But as a child, it seemed, it, yeah, it made sense. And I think because it was such a rooted part of my family, like history, it just is what made sense. Like I had ancestors who joined the church in the beginning and immigrated here from various different countries. I have ancestors that came from England, Germany, Scotland, Denmark, um, all over the place. And they joined, the missionaries went to Europe and converted people, and then they moved here. I think back then they were still in like Illinois, but a lot of them walked from Illinois to Utah when they eventually went to Utah. Yeah, I had like a grandmother from Scotland who, or no, she was from Italy. She walked like a 4-year old.
maybe this is a very basic question actually, but what what is Mormonism at its
Yeah.
core? Like what's the main sort of belief? Because I think it's kind of something that I feel like I just know, but actually when I think about it, I don't really know.
Yeah. So Mormonism was started by a man named Joseph Smith, and he started the church back in the early, like 1830s, I believe. And he essentially was a con man and wanted a way to make money without having to work.
Okay.
So he didn't want, his family were farmers, but farming is hard work. And so he realized he didn't really want to be a farmer. And so I think at some point he realized that, because at that point in the United States, there was like this spiritual kind of revolution happening where there were a lot of like
What year is
men kind
it?
of preaching, like in the 1830s.
Okay.
So he was from New York, from Palmyra, New York. So it was actually very common at that time for these random people to be starting their own churches. And so he was seeing other people doing it and was like, and he loved to tell stories. And so he wrote the Book of Mormon and claimed it was translated from these golden plates that an angel gave to him. So that was like the premise of the church, was him receiving these golden plates from an angel and then using a hat and a rock to translate those plates into the Book of Mormon,
So
which
you
is like,
know the part about him not wanting to work. Is that like a studied
I think
thing or
that was kind of came up later based on most likely people's journals, because that's one basis of Mormonism, that we're taught to keep journals and to write, to keep really good records, which is later can be very incriminating. So a lot of historical information that we have about Joseph Smith are either from his own journals or from the journals of the people who were around him. So my guess is that that's, or just a pattern, like he probably started other types of jobs. Like one thing he was doing was he had a special rock and he would try to dig for treasure for other people. So other people would come and tell him, like, I think there might be, because it was like this myth that when the Spaniards came, that they buried treasure like all over the United States. And so at that point, they still believed that that was true. And so he would tell people that his rock would tell him where the Spanish gold was. And then he would do weird things, like he would plant things. So he would plant like feathers. He would bury them ahead of time and then go in and he'd be like, oh, I think there's a feather here. And
that's
then
a
they
cult
dig.
thing.
Yeah,
It's like
he'd find the feather,
manipulating. Yeah, what's it? Mystical manipulation, they call it.
which is ridiculous because a feather of all things is not something that is going to have been buried hundreds of years ago and still be there. So he would do these like tricks where he would plant things and then people would think, oh my gosh, he was right. He said this thing was going to be there and then he found it. Like he must actually know what he's doing. So he would tell them that he would find gold. But then at some point, sorry, my son's,
Is that a dog or a cat?
it's a cat.
What a cute sound.
Yeah, so then he would tell them he could find like treasure and gold. So they'd be digging, and even sometimes it would include like animal sacrifice. So they would like kill a sheep or a goat or something. And so then inevitably when they didn't find the treasure, he would say something like, "Oh, the way we killed the goat was wrong, or it was the wrong kind of goat."
Mhm.
Kind of very cultish, like victim blaming, like, "Oh, you didn't do it right, and so that's why we didn't find the gold that I know is actually here. Like someone moved it out of the way, so
Uh-huh.
it's further over here or something like that." So he actually was arrested several times for this gold digging that he did.
Why did he
And
get arrested?
so, because people would realize like he was a fraud.
Oh,
So they'd be like, oh, he's done like 4 digs for me and he's never found anything. I think he's full of it. And so then they would alert the police. And then there were several like court hearings where he was arrested. I don't know if he ever went to jail at that point. Most likely he was probably just fined.
What is it? What is in the Book of Mormon?
So the Book of Mormon is what
Is it
he
like a
says.
moral code?
Well, there's supposed to be stories of Jewish people who supposedly left Israel and came to the United States. The
Okay.
genetic, like they know for a fact that that never happened. So it was
Okay.
his way of trying to explain how Native Americans got to this continent and where they came from and their stories.
Wait, is that Native Americans were Jewish?
Yes, that's what the Book of Mormon says.
The Book of Mormon says that Jewish people came from Israel over to North America and they are
Yes,
the indigenous
yes.
Native
And they
Americans.
were like cursed from God, and then that's how they got their darker skin.
Really?
Yes, really.
And then does Mormonism come from that somehow or no, they're unrelated things?
So essentially, like one of the men in the book is supposedly the angel that gave the golden plates to Joseph Smith.
And one of those men was one of the Jewish
So it was
indigenous.
like they were Jewish in the when they were in Israel, and then they came to America, and then and then at some point, so this is like pre-Christ that they believed that this happened, and then they also taught that when Christ died and was resurrected, that he came to the Americas and visited the people that were here. So like after Jesus was resurrected and he showed himself to his disciples, they believe that he also came to the Americas and showed himself to the people here on this continent.
Okay. So what do they think of Christianity?
They think they're Christian.
Mormons are Christian?
They think they're Christian. Most Christians don't consider Mormons to be Christian because one of the basic tenets of Mormonism is that they believe that God, Christ, and the Holy Spirit are three separate entities.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't believe in the Holy Trinity. They don't believe that they're all God. And so that's the biggest split between most Christians and Mormonism.
And what does
So
Mormonism think? That
Mormonism thinks that God was a human and became God.
God was a human first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then became God.
Yeah.
So what's who created the human?
Well,
According.
like each God creates their own world and they're humans that are on the world. So like our God is that God and he created all of us. But they also believe that there are other planets with other gods and other people.
But you said God was a person first.
Yeah, so God came from like another planet. He was a
Oh.
person. He became a god, and then he became our God, essentially.
Okay. Wow. I did not know any of this.
So that's one of the things that the church doesn't teach anymore. But when I was growing up, like I kept a lot of my grandmother's books that she had about Mormonism specifically for this reason because they've kind of whitewashed it and they've taken a lot of this out. And so they
What
don't teach
exactly don't they teach anymore?
they don't so and essentially like the goal is that you could also become a god of your own planet.
I have heard this before.
But now
Okay.
like if you went onto the current LDS website, they wouldn't have that on there. Or they would have something refuting it saying that that's not actually church doctrine, but it is church doctrine. And one of the biggest problems with Joseph Smith was that at some point he decided that having one wife wasn't enough for him. And so he started secretly marrying other women without telling anyone, including his own wife. And then at some point he got caught, and that was essentially what led to his death, was because he was caught practicing polygamy. But most Mormons weren't even taught that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. I was taught that after he died and the next prophet, who was Brigham Young, that polygamy started with that prophet because it's harder to disprove. It was easy because there weren't a lot of records with Joseph Smith, whereas with Brigham Young, he moved everyone to Utah, and then like everybody started practicing polygamy. And then at some point, Utah wanted to become a state, and the government was like, no, we are not going to let you come into the union if you're practicing polygamy. So then, conveniently, God told them that they shouldn't be polygamous. But Utah could become a state.
Some are still, though, no? Are they?
Yes, those are fundamentalists. So at that point, when the church declared polygamy illegal, like the purists, so at that point, the true Orthodox Mormons were like, this doesn't make sense. This is what Joseph Smith told us. And it's in the doctrine that men can't get to heaven unless they have 3 wives, at least 3 wives. So those people were like, well, this is not what Joseph Smith wanted. Like, how can we get rid of something that's such a core tenet of our religion? And so then they split. So a lot of these people left what's now mainstream Mormonism and started fundamentalist Mormonism so that they could keep polygamy.
Wow, this is absolutely amazing. Did a lot of the people that you were surrounded, did you have a big Mormon community around you, or no, just your family?
I mean, it was pretty small. Yeah, it was small here in California.
Do you think a lot of the adult Mormons now believe wholeheartedly in all of that story?
That's a good question. I don't think it's not necessarily now. I think there's room for people to not believe. Whereas when I was in, there wasn't a lot of room. Like, you had to believe all of it. But now I think there's more nuance. And I think in order to keep people.
Is it growing or declining? Because Mormons have very high, but they have high birth rates, but it's still declining.
Yeah. Well, in Utah now they're saying that people actually aren't having as big of families as they used to.
Okay.
So the birth rate in Utah is actually declining.
Wow.
The church says that they're growing, but anecdotal evidence doesn't show that.
Mm-hmm. So what was your first questioning of the Mormon church?
Yeah, I think my first questioning, because another one of the teachings of Mormonism is that God has a wife, so that we have not only a heavenly Father, but we have a heavenly Mother, but we can't speak about her or to her.
Why?
And they say that's God's way of protecting her from us.
Okay.
Because we speak ill of God, we swear, Christ's name has become a swear. We speak badly of God, and so as a way of protecting her, we're not allowed to essentially have any contact with her. And I remember as a teenage girl, it didn't make sense to me, because as a child, the person that I would go to if I ever needed help was always my mother.
Mm-hmm.
Even when it didn't make sense to do that. Like, my parents could both be in the same room, and if I needed something, my automatic reaction was always to go to my mother first. And then as a teenager, recognizing that the leaders in the church were all men, and if I needed help, that those were the people I was supposed to go to. And even then, it didn't make sense. I thought, it was like, I'm a teenage girl. What is this man ever going to understand or know about my experience? And how would they ever help me? It would make much more sense. Like, if I have a mother in heaven, why wouldn't I go to her for help? Mm-hmm. And so I think that was the first kind of thing I started to question. That didn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. And then when I moved away, I just kind of naturally drifted from church. I think I started to see some of the hypocrisy of people who, like, things they were doing when they weren't at church as opposed to how they acted at church, and how it wasn't always in alignment. I think it was in my early 20s that I started to identify as bisexual, and that was a huge no-no in Mormonism. So I think once I kind of made the decision that I was going to have a female partner. I knew that there was the potential that I would get excommunicated, that I would be kicked out. And so I kind of made a deliberate decision to do a really deep dive because I thought, if I'm going to have a female partner and can potentially get kicked out, I want to know for myself if this is actually true. And within Mormonism, like most cults, you're not allowed to read, or essentially at that point it's books. Like you can't read anything that's anti-Mormon because it's not faith promoting. So I knew there were like books and things that kind of delved more deeply into the truth of Joseph Smith and the truth of the church that had been kind of in my awareness, but didn't ever read because you weren't supposed to. So I read in some of those books. And then it was very easy to see that Joseph Smith was a fraud. I think because the church was started so recently, that there's a lot of proof that's actually not that hard to find. So once I realized that Joseph Smith, was not a good person.
Do you know, if I just pause you for a sec, do you know, did Joseph Smith grow up Christian or grow up religious in some way?
Yeah, he grew up, I don't know what, maybe Protestant.
Okay.
But his family was deeply religious.
Okay.
And one of the things he says as part of his story was that there were a lot of different churches, and so he was trying to decide which church he was trying to decide which church he should join. And so kind of his origin story was that he was praying, and God and Jesus both came and told him that none of the current churches on the earth were true, and that he was going to start the true church. And he tells the story that it happened to him when he was 14. But it's not a story that he actually started telling people until he was much older. So it was kind of his retroactive origin story that he made up.
And Jesus, how did Jesus come and tell him if he doesn't?
Well, he believes that God and Christ are two separate beings. So they both came.
Okay, but they came spiritually,
No, he thinks they're full on bodies. They were he could have touched, I think he touched them.
Okay. Okay. So when you started thinking that you might be bisexual, was that just because, did you just start feeling an organic sexual attraction to women? And what was your sex, what was your relationship to sex like before that?
I think I really didn't recognize this until way after the fact, but I had had some sexual trauma as a child and a teenager that I think influenced me becoming gay, and which is something I don't talk about typically because I feel like that's a big no within the gay community, because their basic premise is that you're born gay. And so for me, though, I do think it was trauma based. And as a teenager, my options for dating, there weren't a lot of Mormon boys who were my age who weren't also my cousins. And but I was so different from mainstream teenagers at that point. And I graduated in '96, so in the early to mid '90s. My prospects for dating were nil. So I think at that point, my attempts to date boys didn't go well. And I'm also pretty sure I'm neurodiverse in some way. I don't have any kind of diagnosis, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the autism spectrum. So I think that impacted as well. I think being Mormon made me weird. Being neurodiverse made me weird. I never quite fit in with my peers. So I think it was also, I realized I related to girls better, and it just seemed easier. So I don't actually think I had a sexual attraction towards women. I think I had more of like a trauma aversion towards men. And then it seemed like my only option that if I was going to be with a man, then I would be Mormon. And I didn't want that type of a relationship, at least that I saw as an example within Mormonism, where you were expected to kind of submit to your husband. Because even in temple ceremonies, it's like God, husband, and then wife. So the wife like commits to the husband, and then the husband commits to God. So like she doesn't even have a direct relationship to God herself.
Yeah.
So, and the Mormon boys just weren't interested in me. So I think because growing up, I didn't even know being gay was a thing. Like
That was going to be my next question, is when did you sort of discover that that was an option?
I think either like late high school or just out of high school, but I think that was also the time period where like Ellen first came out. So I think just culturally it was starting to become more visible. Um, and then I think when I moved away, I lived in Salt Lake City for a while, and there's actually a very big gay community in Salt Lake. And I think I recognized like, oh, this is like, you could actually make this choice. And so it honestly just seemed easier.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
think that's the case for a lot of people nowadays?
Yes. I think, especially now with how much like being in these like minority groups is almost like a badge of honor,
Yeah.
that there's shame around just being a straight white woman. Like it's not enough. And you're bad. If there's something inherently bad and wrong with you, if that's your identity. And so as a way to kind of get away from that shame that comes with being taught that, I think it has become more of a choice that people would rather choose to be in relationships with other queer people, queer identifying people, than to be with the reality of just being a straight white woman. And I think men too, I think it's probably even more so with men. There's so much shame around masculinity and being a man. And I knew several men who identified as non-binary, and I knew even at the time that it was just a way for them to kind of distance themselves from their own masculinity that they were afraid of.
I've seen quite a few gay people recently discussing how even though they still feel quite gay, they feel that it comes from trauma in childhood in some way.
Well,
And I'm
that's
not
good.
saying, I'm not saying it is necessarily that all the time, because I've also heard, people studying like environmental factors or certain things. But I have seen that, and I think it's an interesting discussion. Like there's a lot of groups of the gay community. I think that people don't really realize, like it's not a monolith of
Yeah.
thought. And so there are some gay people who think, yeah, my gayness came from trauma, or I was gay and now I'm not gay anymore, or they think, it is an environmental thing, or they are gay but they don't like the trans people, or there's like a lot of variance actually.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. I haven't heard very many of those stories, so it makes me feel better knowing that there's more people coming out with those types of stories, because it doesn't make sense that it wouldn't be the case, at least for some people.
Yeah, and I think it's not a biologically normal thing to have. To have at all, really, but to have a lot of, like,
Yeah.
it's it, when we don't look at things like that in the name of just like tolerance and accepting everything, it's like, but it's not quite normal for our species, and so I think it's
Yeah.
worth that questioning and looking into. And I have seen, I think especially for women, it seems to be quite common nowadays to identify as bi.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there's, yeah, like you said, there's this, I think relationships in general have become, like heterosexual relationships have become harder. You see it everywhere. Like younger people just aren't interacting with each other well. I saw some sort of I think it was just the election that happened in Germany, but I think our election was that way as well, where young women are like going way left and young men are going way right, and that's causing a lot of rift. Like they're just, yeah, and like young people, they're not having as much sex, they're not really going out as much, they're not communicating as much.
I think COVID really played a part in that. I
Mm.
think having lockdown for a lot of these kids in the time of their life where they would be kind of experimenting with their peers in what adult relationships look like. Um, I think all of them kind of being locked down and or having to wear masks. So all these ways of keeping them separate from each other, I think will have long-term effects on their relationships with themselves and each other.
Yeah. How old are you've one child? Multiple.
Yeah, I have a son and he's going to be 10 in a couple of months.
Okay. Did that impact him, COVID?
He was in kindergarten during COVID. Um, Honestly, looking at his peers, I think his temperament, I think he came out of it fine. I think there were more like physiological effects with lockdown. Like last year, he got sick a lot, but it was the first year that like the state was fully open, the school was fully open, the kids weren't required to wear masks or anything. So um, I think his immune system took a hit and missed some developmental milestones during that time period. But as far as his temperament, I don't see any real deep impacts, but um, I've seen things with his peers that I do think are because of COVID and being locked down during that very like precious developmental period. Yeah. But I think the deeper impact was on some of my nieces and nephews who are a lot older and who were like in middle school and high school during that time.
Yeah.
Visibly, it seems like the impact on them has been a lot harder.
I think that would have been like the hardest age to be, maybe like 15, 16, like that sort of
Yeah,
in
like they
between.
didn't get to have prom, they didn't have their graduation, uh, just normal interactions. Like so much of their interactions were online. They missed out on literally just figuring out how to sit with a group of teenagers and be together and experience themselves, or even, dating and having early sexual experiences. Um, I could see how it would be a lot harder to pick that up as an adult if you not only didn't have it, but would get in trouble if you did. Like I think there was a lot of fear that was put around like being in groups or even being one on one. And so I wonder how much is just this kind of underlying anxiety and fear of other people.
Yeah. And then you spend a lot, like when you're separated like that, you spend more and more of your time on social media and you're just like scrolling and you're in, I think, more and more echo chambers too, right? And I
Yeah,
think
with
when you're,
algorithms kind of feeding you.
yeah, and I think I'm just thinking about it now, when you're that age, it's hard enough as an adult to realize that that's what's happening and to
Mm-hmm.
make it not happen, like to sort of seek out other things and kind of be like, who thinks differently? But I can really imagine if you're a teenager and you're only in this echo chamber and then you don't quite realize how big the world is and how that works. Um, and just the extent of the impact that these things can have on you and your mind and your
Yeah.
world.
Especially if they're getting the same information at school.
Yeah.
Because like my son doesn't go to public school because I experienced public school indoctrination. Like even though I grew up in a very conservative family, my teachers were all extremely liberal. Um, so it was a bit of a like, it was a disconnect I think that I carried for a long time
What do
between
you
like,
mean by indoctrination? Like, what are the kinds of things that you feel were being indoctrinated?
um, I think the first one was like in around the environment.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of like um, pushing around uh, recycling. So I know like when I was in middle school, um, I remember going home and like lecturing and yelling at everyone in my family for not recycling right. So things like that.
And then you know recycling doesn't do anything.
So
I was reading that the other day again. I've heard it before, and then I found something the other day and I was like, wow, this is so bad. And I just like put it down. I was like, I can't think about this.
exactly, yeah. So, that was pretty big at that point in the 90s with, the reduce, reuse, recycle kind of stuff. And I know in middle school, that was, I think I was in seventh or eighth grade when the Clarence Thomas hearings were happening. The Supreme Court
What are
justice who was accused of like sexually harassing
Huh?
Anita, I think Anita Hill was her name. So the teacher I had at that point was like a self-proclaimed feminist, and so the conversations around that were all very um, anti-Clarence Thomas. And I
No.
grew up like my parents were very conservative. Like my mother listened to Rush Limbaugh every day, so I had like this very pro feminism teachers, and then a mother who listened to very conservative talk radio.
The teachers make a big difference. You know what I hadn't thought of at all? I'd never connected any of it until the other day. I wrote the piece I wrote recently the about sexual liberation, how that failed me. And one book that I referenced in that piece is The Awakening. I don't know if you ever read it.
Mm-mm.
Um, and it, so I describe it a little bit in that piece, but it's essentially this woman who's married and trapped in this box, and she has an affair. She has this like wild longing, and she neglects her kids, and you feel this like she just wants to feel alive, and she ends up drowning herself at the end because she like in society at that time. I think it was written in I want to say in the late 1800s or something. You're not allowed to do that as a woman. And I didn't think about it until I was writing this piece, but I was like, the teacher who assigned that to me was like a super butch lesbian woman. She was like our gifted English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And she assigned us all these books, like Sylvia Plath, and, and now I'm thinking, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong. Like, I think a good range of exposure of books and things is good, but it's interesting to me. I had never even thought about like her worldview and how she might be like bringing that in through her teaching at
Yeah,
all. It never even occurred to me.
yeah, like how their own personal politics might be influenced what they're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was definitely some, um, yeah, the environmentalism and feminism, I think, were the two big pieces. Um, at that point, it really wasn't until like the late 90s that people kind of started getting on board with the LGBT community. So that really didn't play a part at all while I was a kid, but I know it does now. Um, is a huge divide, especially I live now in the town that I grew up in, and it's a mix of super liberal people and very conservative people, and so there are huge fights about the content that's being brought into schools, especially around gender ideology. Um, yeah, so when I decided I was bi, and then I was in a relationship with a woman, I did the deep dive about Mormonism, and then
Is this
left.
your early 20s?
I was like my mid-20s. I think I was like 25 or 26.
Okay.
And then I also knew I was going to be moving back. At that point, I was living in Seattle, and my grandfather was dying of a brain tumor. And my grandmother asked me to come back to California to help her with her bookkeeping business. And so my partner at the time and I agreed that we would come back to California. And I knew I would have to come out to my family. So I officially resigned from the church before I moved back to California. Because in Mormonism, that's the thing I think that makes it most cultist, is that you can't just stop going. Like most churches, if you don't want to go anymore, you just stop going.
Why
But with
can't?
Mormonism, they will keep trying to get you to come back.
Oh,
Like missionaries will keep coming to your house, and people,
really?
yeah, will keep trying to get you to come back. Unless you take your name off of like the church rolls, essentially, and then they'll stop bothering you.
Wow. So you have to
And
make a decision, like you're in.
yeah, and I didn't want to risk getting excommunicated, because they have done that to people they have found who have been in same-sex relationships. They have a whole court hearing essentially, and they kick you out of the church. And
Why
so
didn't you want to be excommunicated? Because you didn't want to go through.
mostly because I didn't want them to have the power. Like if I was going to decide if I was going to be Mormon or not, I wanted it to be solely mine. Even if I didn't believe what they were doing, it made sense to me. Like I wanted to actually and I didn't want my family to go through that. Like that would have brought a lot of shame on my parents. Having a child that was excommunicated, like it felt more kind to my family to do it myself.
Did you watch other people get excommunicated?
No, but I had heard stories. Later, I had a cousin who was excommunicated.
Okay.
But I had read a lot of stories about other ex-Mormons who were excommunicated, and it was such a like when you learned about excommunication in first, like there was so much shame around it. That's like literally the worst thing that can happen to you is to be excommunicated. So even if like there, on one hand, you don't really care and you don't believe in the church, there's still this shame around the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you'd rather leave on your own than be kicked out. I feel like
Exactly.
anyone would feel that way.
Yeah. So I left at that point. But up until probably like 3 years ago, most of my family was still Mormon. I think I was the first person in my family to actually leave.
And what was your family like? Were they okay with it or were they really upset?
It never came up.
Oh,
That's another thing. Mormons don't talk about hard stuff.
okay.
So I didn't even know if my parents knew or not because it never came up.
Wow.
Just like I came out to them and then it was just never mentioned again.
What did they say when you came out to them?
The first time I think I sent my parents a letter, and it took a while. It took a few weeks, but my mom sent me an email in response. And essentially, she said the right things, but she didn't mean them. Like, she knew what she wanted to be like a mother. Like, she wanted to be able to love me unconditionally. But you can't really do that when you're Mormon and you have a gay child. It's really not possible. So once it came down to it, like my parents really, really struggled with it. And when that partner and we had like a spiritual wedding because it wasn't legal at the time, and most of my family didn't come because they essentially told me like I can't be happy for you to be living in sin, essentially. Like this isn't something that makes God happy, so I can't support it.
Mm-hmm.
But her and I were we were invited to family dinners. We were invited to go camping as a family. So there were parts where it was like they still loved me and I still loved them and we still had a relationship, but it was very like surface.
Yeah.
And then at some point her and I split up, I think because it was a very deeply codependent relationship. That I didn't recognize at the time. But I think Mormonism also sets up, especially women, to be extremely codependent because there's so much expectation of you martyring yourself essentially. Like you always take care of the people around you before you take care of yourself. And so it sets up a lot of women to, and I think just culturally, like my grandmother especially was very codependent, but like housewives in the 50s and 60s were essentially told, like, when your husband comes home, have his slippers set out for him and his newspaper. Don't tell him about any of your problems. Keep that to yourself. Make sure that the kids are in bed so they're not going to bother him. They're like set up to be martyrs and to have to be like sneaky with the way that they get their needs met. It's like, meet your husband's need, and then maybe you'll get some of the crumbs of that falling off of the table. And I think Mormonism was just kind of an extra of that codependence. But when I left that relationship, I very quickly got into another relationship with another woman, and that relationship ended up being quite emotionally abusive. And I think Mormonism, like when I left that relationship, I was able to recognize a lot of the ways that being raised in a cult kind of sets you up to be easily manipulated.
Yeah.
And it was hard because I almost felt like, because it was a same-sex relationship, there was this need for other people to see us as good enough. And so I didn't want to share some of the bad things that were happening because I thought it would be a reflection of the fact that we were two women. And at that point, we joined a Buddhist group started by a man named Michael Roach, who has now been accused of being a cult leader. And the tenets of Buddhism, I felt like, were used in my marriage to as a means of abuse. Like there was a lot of language around like everything you experience is your karma.
Yeah.
So if you are experiencing me abusing you, it's because it's your karma, that it's not really abuse. So it took 8 years for me to get out of that relationship, and it was only until after my son was born that the abuse escalated. And I think as a way, when I recognized like how it was impacting my son, who was like 2 at the time, that I realized how unhealthy it was for him and how the relationship needed to end. So I feel like part of that marriage was like the LGBTQ leftist cult, the Buddhist cult, and like the combination of the two of those. And like towards the end of our relationship, he asked to open our marriage and practice polyamory, which definitely just escalated everything and made everything much, much, much worse.
Did you do that?
We did. And then I ended up being poly for about 4 years after that.
Wow.
It wasn't until then, when I was in the spiritual group that you were in, that I kind of woke up to wokeism and the cult of that and recognized like, oh, being polyamory is like self-torture. Like, this is so bad for me. This is not who I am. And through that kind of figuring out what was actually mine, what came from my religious upbringing, and coming out of that to realize I was not only not poly, but I wasn't gay, and then voting for Trump. Yeah. So it's a lot. I don't even know what parts to go back and dig in deeper around, but um,
Well, I think it's really sad the way that these spiritual teachings can be used in such an abusive manner. And that was really hard for me when I left. I was just going back yesterday and reading some of the posts that I had written like a year after I was out of the cult. And I remember when I was reading them, I was like, yeah, one thing I was struggling so much with at that time was if these beliefs can be used in such an abusive way, then like, are they useful at all? And I had to throw them out completely for a while in order to, I think, find myself again. And I think now I have found, well, really what I've been finding is how a lot of these spiritual things, like there's so much overlap with uh like even Eckhart Tolle has overlap with the Bible, and teachings of Jesus. And there's this overlap, there's these spiritual teachings or truths that I think are deeply beautiful at their core and have meaning, but also are so easily taken by humans and used for evil. And so there's this real, I think I've only recently sort of come back into feeling where I stand with what I believe and feel, but it's always a big red flag to me when somebody is extremely absolute. Like when they're just like, this is the truth 100% of the time, it only means this, like,
yeah,
I think we really can't know 100% of the time that anything is super certain in that way.
yeah. There has to be room for the unknown, essentially,
Yeah.
or not, or believing like that I don't know everything, and that
Mm-hmm.
my understanding of like a particular thought or a subject, um, like my tiny human brain, like may not be able to conceptualize or hold the complexity of the whole truth.
Yeah. I think you see that a lot with culty stuff, and I see that a lot with leftist stuff, is this like unwillingness to consider that they could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it happens on the right too, but there's this particular moral sense with wokeness, especially where it's just like, I am morally superior and right, and there's just no chance that I could be wrong in my view because I'm so morally correct.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think because so much of like being in any cult, like your whole world depends on that reality being true. And if one piece of it starts to crumble, then you have to see your whole reality fall apart. And like most people aren't willing to do that. And I feel like in my life, I've had to allow my reality to crumble like 5 or 6 times. I had to be willing to, like, there had to be a crack in the foundation, and then a humbling of myself to be willing to acknowledge, like, oh shoot, like I did it again. These beliefs that I held on to, like a life raft, like weren't actually true, and I'm just gonna have to let it go and like drown a little bit.
Yeah. That's a big thing. I think that's what I have attributed when people have been like, oh, like, how did you get out? Or how does someone get out? I think that the main quality that I had was my willingness to have my worldview shatter. And I
Yeah.
think it's because, like I had done it before.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you've had many instances of that too, and it's kind of like even though everything can be wiped out and shattered, once it happens once, I think we tend to have a sense of like I'm gonna survive this somehow.
Totally.
Even if
Yeah.
like I have no idea how, I know that I can be just wiped down to zero and have my world sort of end, but then I'm gonna be all right.
Exactly. And I think being that I did it with in such a way, leaving Mormonism, like it's not a small thing. Like it's a big thing when you're raised in a multicultural, or not a multicultural, a multi-generational Mormon family. Like, because even when my parents decided to leave, the thing that was the hardest for my mother was she thought like her ancestors were going to be disappointed in her for leaving because of all of the sacrifices that they had made to join the church. And um, like recognizing that for her and seeing that, recognizing it myself, like at that time, like, oh yeah, it wasn't like I had joined as an adult and then I was just making that decision for myself. Like I was potentially disrupting my whole family system. Like within Mormonism, the goal essentially is for the family to be sealed in the temple. So like when the parents are married in the temple, they kind of have this like special blessing put on the parents that all of their subsequent children will be theirs for all of eternity. And so when everybody dies, you'll all end up in heaven together as a family. But if one of the children like leaves the church, then they won't be in heaven with the rest of the family. So me leaving was not just disruptive to my family in this life, it was potentially like disruptive for all of eternity.
But how do you they believe in heaven, but they also believe you're going to become your own god?
I don't know how that part works. There really it was that was one of the things that was almost taught of like this is something that can happen, but we don't understand. God will explain it to us when we're all dead, kind of a
Yeah.
situation.
I see there does seem to be this when something is very culty in this way, they modernize it. They change
Yeah.
it. And so they start to remove these things.
Yes.
And I don't know if you're familiar with German New Medicine at all, but I wrote a piece about
Yeah.
medicine. And that was the main thing. Like, people still, since I have written that piece, some people will, they get mad about it or they write and they're like, you just, it's not, it might have started that way, but it's not that way anymore. And you just take what you want and you leave the rest. But with something like that, like with German New
Yeah.
Medicine, when when it's based on something false,
Yeah.
like the
Exactly.
thing initially was made up. And this is my main thing with German New
Yeah.
Medicine is like initially it was he made it up. The whole thing was fraudulent. And so there are aspects of it now in the way that it's like filtered down through people that I think uh have aspects of truth to them. Like like I do think sometimes you have some sort of emotional conflict or emotional stressor and it can relate like you're afraid of speaking so your throat gets really sore or something. Like these things I do think happen, but when people are like, "Oh, I just used that part." You can't because it wasn't part of that to begin with. That comes from somewhere else. It doesn't come from that thing.
Yeah. I feel like when I read your piece, I thought of Mormonism, and I feel like, especially when the split of polygamy happened, um, there has to be a lot of like mental gymnastics for current Mormons to feel okay being Mormon because the the whole purpose of the beginning of the church was all rooted in polygamy. So the fact that there's no longer polygamy, like you really have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to make that work. But like you said, you can't. Like if you go back to the very beginning of what Joseph Smith taught and the basic tenets of the church, it was based in fraud. He was essentially a narcissist. Like at some point, he designated himself as like king of the world, which is like, of course he did. Like that's always how it ends up
Yeah.
being like this man thinking he's in charge of everything. And based in oppressing women, he would marry teenage girls. He would essentially manipulate them and tell them like if they didn't marry him that an angel of God was going to come and kill him and her family, like really abusive, bad stuff. And his predecessor, after he was killed, Brigham Young, was even worse. He essentially had a man that he called his avenging angel, and he would send him to go kill people, like to go kill his enemies.
Oh.
Like he tried to assassinate a governor of another state. Like they slaughtered the Native Americans that existed in Utah where they took over. People trying to get to California who would go through Utah would be murdered. Like that, like it's not good. Like there's nothing good about that church. Like yes, there might be things that exist now, like you said with German New Medicine, there might be parts of it. Like yeah, if you go and you find a random Mormon, 99.9% of the time they are a kind, loving, humble, like Christ-driven person who wants nothing more than to do the right thing. They're very genuine, kind people. They help their community. They tend to be very committed to their children. They work in classrooms. Like they're good people. But the basis of their faith is rooted in violence and trauma and the submission of young girls and women.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
And I think it seems like when it doesn't really stand up to historical analysis.
It doesn't. And I think that's why there's so much push around not looking at those actual truths. But at this point, I think there are so many people leaving because it's hard to keep the information away. Like before, it was just a matter of not reading a specific book, but now there are so many podcasts and TikTok and Instagram, and it's hard to get away from the information. Whereas you had to seek it out before, whereas now it's everywhere. And there's so many people who've left that I think you can't hide away from the reasons that people are leaving anymore. Whereas before, like at church, we were just taught if somebody left, it's because they wanted to go sin. Like they wanted to drink or break the rules essentially. Whereas now, like we can see it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I only have a few cousins now who are LDS. And so unless you literally don't want to have a relationship with most of it's almost like the converse from where when I left, I was like the only one. Now there are so few that are in, they're having to choose to follow the church's like desire for you to ostracize those people or to not have a relationship with your family anymore. So like if most of your family has left and you're the only one still in, if you follow like you're not supposed to associate with people essentially too closely who aren't Mormon anymore, which is another big cultist level. So that would mean that you essentially couldn't be around your family anymore. And I think people are not wanting to do that. And so I know when I left, I feel like my parents were able to see that I was like still happy. Like I was still a good person. I was a good mother. And I think it kind of helped them recognize like, oh, it's because the church will tell you, if you leave, your life is going to be terrible. Like God will remove all your blessings. Life won't be worth living anymore, essentially. And so when you can actually see people who have successfully left and actually have like, who can still have a moral compass, who can make good decisions without having a church to tell you what those good decisions are. I think I think it was helpful for them when they just decided to leave, because they could see me as an example of like, okay, well, our daughter did this, and like she's not in prison.
Reminding me, what do you think of Islam? Because this sounds similar to me in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I do remember. Remember it. I feel like especially like in the late '90s and the early 2000s, there was a big push to have more acceptance around the Islamic faith. Um, but there was always a piece of me that didn't feel fully comfortable with that. And I think once I did leave Mormonism, I was able to see the similarities. And especially now, with everything that's happening with Israel and Hamas, I think it's hard to deny like the violent foundation of Islam.
Yeah.
That it's I don't think that there is a way to actually be part of a faith like that and take out the violent tendencies and the anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that's how it seems. I've started now since the earlier episode of my podcast, where we talked about that. I think it was episode 3. Um, I've sought out more ex-Muslim people, and there are some that have like that's kind of their main brand or focus is like speaking out. And it's been really interesting to me. Just a couple days ago, I was seeing this sort of debate between there was a white guy who I think is British who's went to school to sort of defend Islam, and like his whole schooling, his everything is this uh Islam defender. And he took some snippet of an interview that people were sharing by a Muslim man, and where they were talking about jihad and all this stuff, and this man was like, well, when, like it's unfair to Islam to translate these terms in Arabic into meaning this, because when we say jihad, um we don't mean, whatever. He was saying it just means struggle. Like directly translated, it just means struggle. It doesn't mean what all these racist people are saying it means. And then there's this like ex-Muslim woman who shared it and was like, no, it means exactly what you think. It means holy war, like it means kill the Jews. And so you hear it directly from the people who have been such a part of it. And I was reading this woman's story, and she grew up super Muslim, and uh she described when she wanted to leave, like when she started to see these different problems with it. It was after 9/11 happened, actually, and she was kind of just like, I don't know if I can like stay in this faith anymore, because she saw people cheering, people she knew like cheering that when 9/11 happened, and she was just like, I don't know, I can't do this. And she left, and she said the first person who threatened to kill her was her mother. Was just like, I'm gonna kill you for leaving. And then I found out that all of that happened in Vancouver.
God.
Like she wasn't living, like reading her life story, and how um she had to wear the thing, and she had to follow all these rules, and she was so indoctrinated in. I thought she had to be living in the Middle East somewhere, and then she fled, and I was like, wow, how did she flee and get to Canada? And then I found out all of that happened in Canada. And actually when she was younger, she tried to oh, I can't remember now. There was some sort of thing where she was having abuse was happening to her, but when they went to the police were really reluctant to they were just like, well, this is part of your culture. This is part of your religion. So we can't intervene here. And I was like, oh my God, that all happened like here, kind of where I live. Like it's a big part. I also know someone who's a therapist, and she is heavily monitored by what she can and can't say. The board of her therapy is all Muslim women in Canada. And so she's not like, yeah, I don't want to give any of her identifying factors away. I don't think she would like it, but there's a lot of things that she has felt from that where it's very anti-Jewish.
Yeah.
And it's like people don't realize that it's happening. It's coming in.
It is. I feel like there's a lot of anti-Christian, anti-Jewish sentiment, just
Yeah.
generally, especially
Did
in the
you see
left.
all the beheaded Christians? Yeah. That they
Yeah.
killed?
I think it's like it's culturally become okay to criticize like white heterosexual men, Christians, and Jews. Like those have become like the okay groups
Yeah.
to hate.
Think about Christianity now.
It's so interesting. So there was a long time where I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. Like I considered myself an atheist. I didn't believe in God at all. But I think when you grow up in a religion so controlling as Mormonism, you almost have to throw it all out. I had like practiced like earth-based spiritualities for a while. I was Buddhist for a while. And then, being part of the spiritual group, I kind of let it all go. And then more recently, like in the last few years, I've just been feeling these little hints to like start reading the Bible again, which was like a huge dent to my ego. I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to read the Bible. Why are you telling me to read the Bible? Like, I don't want to do that. It's like I bought a Bible and it just sat there like for years and years.
That's what I did.
And then I would like pull it out and I'd be like, I don't want to do this, and I'd take it away. And so last year I was like, okay, I'm gonna actually, if I keep feeling like this is something I need to do, I just need to listen. So like early in January, it was like the first weekend. So I have my son for a week at a time. So this was like a weekend where he was with his other mom, and I decided I was gonna like take that Saturday. It was almost gonna be like a spiritual retreat for me, and I was just gonna do a lot of journaling and praying and just like pondering like what direction do I want to go in. And I have a creek that runs behind my apartment that's really close. And so one morning I woke up and I just felt like this prompting to walk down to the creek. So I walked down and there was like this little, almost like a little nook that was kind of shaded with trees with the creek. And I felt like I just needed to stand in that little spot. And so I was standing there just listening to birds and the water of the creek. And like out of nowhere, I heard this voice in my head that said, God is calling you back to Christianity. And then I just like stood there and cried for like 20 seconds. And I was like, okay. And I've just been kind of grappling with that ever since. Like, well, what does this mean? Like, I don't know what it means. It's still like so fresh. It still feels so new. And there's still so, like, I tried going to an Episcopalian church, and then immediately after the prayer happened with Trump after his inauguration, and I was like, okay, well,
woke churches.
like,
And they seem to be mostly
Episcopalian churches out for me. So, and then I had read this book. I don't remember what it was called, Waking Up to the Dark or something like that. And it was like written by this man who essentially was a Buddhist, and he started praying the rosary and started having like the Black Madonna like coming to him in visions and stuff. And so I had read that a few years ago, and I had been feeling this prompting to start praying the rosary. My father's family was Catholic. So I had found a podcast that started at the beginning of the year where they kind of walk you through learning how to pray the rosary. So I started doing that. So I've done that almost every day since the beginning of this new year. And when I feel a prompting to read the Bible, but even in all my experiences, I'd always felt a very deep connection to Christ and to his story. And even when I was in, it's odd, like, I think it was something that I didn't even recognize for a long time. And even at some point, I had toyed with the idea of converting to Judaism. But I was like, well, if I'm going to be Jewish, then I wouldn't believe in Jesus anymore. So that was kind of that was the only reason why I wouldn't have done that, was because I still felt such a connection to him. So yeah, at this point, I'm still just figuring out what it means.
Mm-hmm. There's been such a resurgence of people feeling that same thing on their own, of just like, I think I'm gonna read the Bible. And I think that it's a response. Um, I watched JP Steers. Did you have happened to see his? Do you know who he is?
The name sounds familiar.
He has like long red hair. He
Oh yeah.
comedy videos of New Age stuff.
Yeah.
And then he converted to Christianity. And so he was one of the first like big people I knew when I started realizing like there was such a theme of New Age to Christianity people happening. And I don't even know if I watched his video when it happened, but about a year ago or so, maybe, when I was like, I had bought Bibles but not really read them, and I was just like, I don't know, I think I'm like curious, but I can't quite get there. And I was trying to understand, and so I watched his video, and one thing he said that just really struck me was, he said for him there was a seeing so much evil in the world. And I think I want to say for him it was like COVID stuff, like around that time, and just seeing all this evil. But for me, I feel that there was this very same thing in leaving the cult. For me, there was this like, this is evil. And now that it kind of opened me back up to Christianity, because I felt like now I see that there is good and evil. And this is what they mean when they say the devil. They don't mean like an actual physical scary creature coming in your door. They mean this. And it just sort of like, I think that was the beginning of the opening of the door for me. Again, was just this sort of like, this is evil. And if there's evil, like, and I think that it seems like part of the resurgence that Christianity is having, I think among younger people too, is this, I think it does come from that.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I really have liked about Christianity, as I've just started exploring, I mean, I grew up Christian, but like you, I feel just very much like a baby. Like, I don't really know a lot. But as I started exploring more, I was like, oh, right, there's like, people have been dissecting and questioning Christianity for thousands of years. So there's so much information, and so many things you can explore to be like one book I just bought is called Is God a Moral Monster? And it's like a whole book just going through these moral questions of God. And when he, like, I like the history aspect of Christianity, how it does seem to stand up to these historical questioning. And I think, while of course there have been many Christian cults, like cults that have formed through using that, I think a healthy Christian church, a healthy Christian place, from what I've seen, is very responsive to questioning of like, what does this mean? And I think if you're in any sort of church that they're just like, don't ask, it's like, no, you should be able to ask, I think, and share all of your like skepticism and your thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's definitely a red flag. Any group where you're not able to question anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to go back to a couple things from what you had said. So one is you said you were on the outskirts of the same cult that I was
Yeah.
very deep within. I'm curious what your experience was with that. I would love to not name her, but your just
Yeah.
experience in general.
Yeah. So at that point, when I found the group, I was very still deeply in the process of like leaving my abusive marriage and figuring out how to like raise a child on my own. It was like in the summer of 2021, so COVID was definitely still like happening. Like at the beginning of COVID, I was still very like in the leftist cult mind thinking, and so at the beginning, and I think I was just still deeply in like the trauma of my marriage, that I was like, okay, we just have to like do what we need to do to break the curve or whatever they said. I don't even remember now. And so I like went along with it. Like I wore the masks. I wanted to be the good white woman, to do all the things that I was supposed to prove that I deserve to exist. And like literally it came down to that. Like, do I even deserve to exist as a white woman who's like, my father's side of the family is Spanish, so it's like all this guilt around Spaniards did as much like conquering as Britain, all this like generational guilt. And so just yeah, I was very deep in like figuring out who I was. And I could see like it's almost like I could see this point where being so like deep in my trauma that it could so easily be twisted so that I would then become the abuser. That I could like weaponize my victimhood to then abuse the people around me. Like I could see it happening with other people in my life, and was like, I don't want that to happen. Like I didn't want the sexual trauma I experienced to then become like a bat that I used to beat over my current partner's head. Like, don't say this certain thing because you're going to trigger me. Don't touch me in this way because you're going to trigger me. And I could see how that, like, the weaponization of that victimhood
It
could
can be
then
very
be
tempting. It's very tempting to the ego to want to just,
exactly,
yeah.
yeah. Because I can't, like, I'm still carrying around this unresolved anger of this abuse that this other person did, and I can't punish them. So it's easy to then turn that and then to punish the the person that you're actually with who isn't abusing you. And when I found that group, a lot of the things that she was saying around, and like I was a people pleaser, so like in that mindset, like I was really the bad one.
Yeah.
Like in a relationship with like someone who's outwardly abusive and someone who's a people pleaser, the people pleaser is actually the bad one.
Right.
So there were ways where it could have very easily then been used for like self abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, I was actually able to use it as a way of like seeing the roots of the trauma in my ex and how that trauma caused the abuse. So I was able to actually have some compassion for her and able to see the ways in which I allowed it to happen. So it was like I had like allowed myself to be a victim. I had allowed myself, the process of like fully embracing that, fully feeling all the feelings around it. And then I was able to see the way I actually participated and the way that it allowed me to not take responsibility for myself. And, but I was definitely never in any kind of an inner group. Like like on group calls. I think maybe I was on camera like twice in all the years I was there. Um, for the most part, I don't really think she cared about me all that much,
Yeah.
which is probably not a bad thing.
No, it's a
But I
great.
think,
That's when you end up having a good experience is when you're just
yeah,
like left completely alone.
yeah. But I know like a lot of what you were going through, I could relate to.
When
And
I
I,
left, you mean?
well, just even while you were in it, like when you
Oh,
were first recognizing like your food stuff, like I really
no.
related a lot to that. And like, um, when you started to recognize that you were actually very like underfed and like a lot of your over
Yeah,
emotional reactions just came from being hungry.
that
Like
part is.
that for me was a huge like ding 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 ding, because I think I spent most of my adult life just being underfed. And so
Yeah.
I think I learned a lot of what I got out of being in there was you, and like
Oh, that's nice.
following like what your experiences and what you were dealing with. And so then when you left, it was like a huge like crap. Like I don't, what do I do with this? Like, do I stay? Do I leave? Um, and having to kind of recognize some of the red flags uh, that were in the group, and recognize that I wasn't in it enough to have had, like, it took me a lot longer to figure out and to see the unhealthy parts because I was so much on the edges of everything. And, but yeah, I think there were positive things that I got out of it. I think having it help me leave like woke
That was
leftist
the biggest thing for
culture,
me was
like
that I,
recognizing the lies around COVID. I think that was helpful too. But I was starting to question it right at the same time that I found the group. Um, yeah, so those are the things I think that were positive, and like helping me deconstruct my own beliefs and to recognize that I wasn't actually gay. Like for a hot minute, I identified as non-binary, and recognizing like where that came from and how that wasn't actually true. Um, but I made a lot of really bad financial decisions in order to stay because those programs were so outlandishly expensive and were not actually feasible for a single mother living in a very high cost of living area, right? It's like inflation was starting to get really bad. So I'm still like digging myself out of the financial hole that I made specifically from
it
being
keeps a
in
lot of women in there actually because they,
like the sunk cost fallacy.
yeah, yeah,
Like
I've
you,
heard that from many women who have left. Or there's many ways with money that she keeps people in where like she'll give people scholarships, but on the contract is if you leave, then you have to pay back all of the money that you would have had to pay had you not
yeah.
been on a scholarship. So then you're just
Oh
like
yeah, yeah. You're just
forced to be in, or she'll hire people to work for her so that then
yeah,
uh now they're making money, and if they leave they don't have any money, and she'll like use that
yeah,
against them as
yeah.
threats often. It's like, yeah, it's really, yeah. And I've heard from people too, I don't know, I have with money, I tend to, I've done a lot of work on my relationship with money and my attitude toward money, and so I tend to not place as heavy as a weight on like how much something costs and how much I got out of it. Like it just is like money is money, it comes and goes. However, uh there is something to be said, I think, when you're spending just so much money. I don't know. It's a question. It's like I paid her over $40,000 US, and it's like, I don't know. Was it worth it? No. But I did make more money in my business, but I
Yeah.
think in retrospect the only reason I made more money was because I actually started like showing up consistently. It
Totally.
wasn't
Yeah.
because of all of her like magic special teachings and whatever. It was just because that through joining, I started actually like showing up for my business
Mm-hmm.
more
Yeah.
consistently.
Yeah. I know for me, like, it's a hard, like, I know there was a lot I got out of it, and I'm grateful I did, but I do regret the amount of money I spent, mostly because I really couldn't afford it. Like, if I could
Yeah.
have afforded it and I had no, like, lasting impact on my life, I
Well,
think I
that's
would be
what I've
more
heard.
okay with it, but
Yeah.
it
I've
was
also
not
heard
a
from
good
a lot of
financial
people
decision.
that like they are paying a lot but not really getting anything. And that was how it started to be with me toward the end was like you're paying a bunch of money but getting on calls where we spend 3 hours of her just ranting and venting about nothing, and it's like what am I paying for? So
No, I felt like, I think what actually helped wake me up a lot was when Jordan started his group,
yeah.
and I was like one of the first people I think that joined that, and recognizing like the value that I actually got from just more like concrete advice. So, and like how much I was paying for that as in comparison to like what I was paying for her programs, it was like, oh, and I think especially with being a single mom to a young son, the advice that I got from Jordan around parenting like was so invaluable. Like it was so helpful to my relationship with him. Because there's just so much like I don't know as a mom. Like I wasn't ever a little boy. Like I don't know what his experience of his life is like. But being able to hear like Jordan share his experience as a young boy, especially because I feel like from the way he talks about himself, like he's very sensitive, like he's very kind, like he it sounds a lot like my son. And so
Oh, sweet.
it
Yeah.
feels like a delicate balance of like honoring that sensitivity, but also like honoring the fact that he's going to be a man someday. And like, what does that mean? And how do I support like his growing masculinity without like dampering it, if that makes sense? Like, how do I help him be fully embrace himself as his future self as a man, while also maintaining like that level of sensitivity and care that he has for the people around him. And Jordan seemed like the perfect person for the advice around that. So, um, and just the work that you guys were able to do in that group was it was really invaluable.
Glad. Yeah. I think that's like an essential question for anyone raising boys today really is there's not as much it's like what does healthy masculinity really look like? Because we've now shot down a lot of the good things about masculinity in our culture. Like, we're just like, you shouldn't be any of these things. They're all toxic. But then at the same time, you don't really want to go into the realm of like that no emotions, I can't hug my child, that kind of
Yeah.
man. Um, so yeah, I bet it's a big thing. I would love to hear more about so we didn't really close the loop on you becoming straight and realizing you're straight.
Yeah. So when I left my marriage, I was dating a man. He later identified as non-binary, but the time we started dating, he identified as pan. And the relationship I had with him um, was actually what like it was really confronting for me at that time because I had been into very long-term relationships with women. So it was actually very confronting being in a heterosexual relationship. Um, but it was actually like, despite the polyamory aspect, which was very damaging, there was a lot about it that was actually very healing. I think at that point I couldn't have been in like a more traditional relationship because I think I needed the space to heal. So I think it was actually that's what I needed. Like I was able to have a partner who offered me support and care, but there was no ability for a lot of like enmeshment or for me to then just turn around and like put all of my energy into that relationship with him. So it was like I got a little bit of stability and to be in partnership with someone who actually deeply cared for me and wanted the best for me and like supported all of the best parts of my life. Like my previous relationships, my partners were jealous of I have 3 younger sisters, and they were always jealous of my relationship with my siblings. Whereas he also was the oldest of like 5 kids, and he was very close with his siblings. Like he loved his siblings, and so he always supported me having a relationship with my family. And it was at that point I realized, like, oh, if you get a relationship with someone and they try to make wedges between you and your family, like that's actually a red flag. So being with him and then being in that group where I kind of was deconstructing things, I realized like, oh, yeah, I'm actually straight. And I found like journals from when I was a child, like a young girl and a teenager. Oh my God, I was like boy crazy. Like that was not a story that I had about myself at all.
Yeah.
I had like, if someone had asked me at that point, like, tell me who you were as a young girl, boy crazy never would have come up. But actually going back and read, and like every other page, you'd be like, oh, now I have a crush on this boy. Like, oh, now I have a crush on, and sometimes it was like 5 of them at the same time. And
Yeah.
recognizing like, oh no, like if you are your sexuality that you are when you're like a young teenager, I was straight.
Yeah.
I I was obsessed with boys. I had a million crushes. Um, and then I think just allowing myself to have role models who were in like heterosexual relationships and seeing like what those relationships look like and how they operated and realizing like, oh, that's actually what I deeply wanted. But
Yeah.
as a teenager, like boys just didn't like me. Like they weren't interested. And so I think there was a part of me that was like, and the times I had tried to date, I wouldn't even call them men because like we were in our early 20s, teenagers. Um, the relationships just didn't work. And so I think I had convinced myself that like men don't like me, that I can't be in relationships with them. And so when I realized that I could choose to be with women, that just felt easier.
Yeah.
So I think the most confronting things I've had to do are recognizing like I'm straight and Christian. It's been really like damaging to my ego.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. That's funny. Do you now think that you were ever really attracted to the women that you were with? Or do you think it was just like a mental, like, how do you think about it now?
What I think happened was like, I think like I'm a deeply loving and caring person. And I think I like genuinely did love the women I was in relationship with, but I don't think I was in love with them. I think I kind of mixed up that feeling of like romantic love and like just being very, very deeply like loving like another human. And I think the sexual trauma made like heterosexual sex scary. And so because that sex was scary, then sex with a woman was automatically less scary.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like because with, I think there are some benefits to just knowing like what gay sex is and what it looks like, because I think it can like open up. I think there can be some very like binary and limiting ideas of what straight sex looks like, to where it's just like penetrative sex and then it's like done. So
Well,
I think,
totally. I think that's the main thing that I say to people sexually is like
Like
to
opening up your definition of what
yeah,
sex actually
exactly.
is.
Like
Like if
stop
you're having sex with a woman, you're not just like it opens up the possibility of what you can do when you're being intimate with another person. So
right.
I think that experience I think was very beneficial. Um,
I
and
never
knowing
really
the different types of pleasure a body can have, and it doesn't have to look in a specific way.
that's fascinating to me because I really think like I wonder how many people think like gay sex is like that and straight sex is the
Mm-hmm.
other way, like the the way you first described it, it's just this quick, it's this penetrative thing. And how much more might be there for people if
If
they
they just opened it up.
thought of straight sex as more, yeah, because that's what Jordan and I have said to people all the time is just this like there's got to be way more gray area in what sex is. And I was talking to a woman the other day where she was really intent on like she was just like, we do foreplay and then we have sex. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's not
All of
foreplay.
it is sex.
Yeah, I was like, there's no foreplay and then sex. Like, don't divide it up. It's all sex. Um, and so, yeah, that's very fascinating. I also think that, uh, with people in general, but women, I think maybe more than men, maybe not. No, actually, I don't know. Maybe we're both the same. I just think our capacity to be aroused sexually, like we can get aroused by things that we're not necessarily actually aroused by, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
we can get physically aroused even if,
Mm-hmm.
by anything. Like I think they've done studies where, you watch animals having sex or you watch like anything where your brain is like that's sex or sexual, like you can get turned on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot with the gender ideology stuff, I've had a lot of thoughts of myself as a teenager and what I would have chosen or done had that been all around me in the way that it is now.
Yeah.
Because I didn't even really, I mean, I knew my one teacher was a lesbian and I knew that like people could be gay or lesbian and that it existed, and my family was like my parents were okay with it. I never heard them say anything negative. Uh but it didn't really occur to me that it was a real option because it wasn't really modeled in a like here is a thing you could do. Like it wasn't shown in a tempting way. It was just sort of like, yeah, some people are that way. And I never thought too much about it. Like I kissed a couple of my girlfriends and when I was a teenager, we were super drunk or whatever. But it was so like drunken. I never thought about it as, oh, could I be attracted to women? Because I didn't really see people doing it. And now I wonder if, and I was so rebellious by nature that I think if I had been shown all of these options of all these ways you could kind of be like, fuck you to the world,
Oh yeah, yeah.
I would have maybe taken on one of these different identities. Oh, I'm bi. Oh, I'm whatever, just because.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you think back, like I think back to when I was like 10 and I was playing on the boys' soccer team and I learned like girls were worse at sports than boys. And if I had been surrounded by all that at like age 9, 10, would I have wanted to be a girl? I don't know.
One of my sisters, um, the sister three, she was a tomboy. Like when she was little, she, but it's funny because she honestly was like the prettiest of all of us, like as a baby. She had like long blonde hair and blue eyes. Like literal strangers would stop my mom to tell her like how beautiful my sister was when she was a baby. Like a woman in town like painted a portrait of her. Like she was absolutely beautiful, a beautiful baby. But she was a tomboy. Like she liked to play with the boys. She liked to climb trees. She would, chop our dolls' heads off. Like she did not want to do like traditional girly things. And at some point, like she asked my mom to cut her hair off. She only wore boys' clothes. She would say, like, when I grow up, I'm going to be a boy. And we were just like, okay, whatever. We just like let her do her thing. And now she's like super straight, like girly girl, wears pink all the time. And my parents talk a lot about that, like that they're so grateful that there wasn't any such thing as like trans ideology when she was a child, that everyone just accepted she was a tomboy and she was able to just develop normally and now is a woman. Because if she was a child now, like my parents would probably be pressured into like doing all this unnecessary intervening and indoctrinating and trying to convince her, oh yes, you are a boy. Whereas they were just like, oh, we always just like, oh, my sister's a tomboy, it's fine.
Well, it's super weird, right? Because now we've reduced like female and male or men
Yeah,
and
we've
women
almost
down to
like
stereotypical.
exactly. We've like are now taking away people's ability to almost even be gay. Like
Yeah,
being gay is now almost like a bad thing again, but for
yeah,
a weird twisted reason. And you have to either be in one binary or the other. Like there's no such thing as gender nonconforming men and women anymore. Like if you show any inclination towards the other gender, then you're just that other gender.
then you're non-binary or you're not. Yeah, you can't be like a butch lesbian woman.
No.
You're like a non-binary whatever. I've read a lot of really excellent pieces by lesbians about what the last amount of years have been like for them and how it seems like they've gotten just the worst end of the stick in the whole
They really
gender
have.
thing.
Yeah, because it's almost like you're not even allowed to be lesbian anymore.
Yeah.
Because if you won't date a trans woman, like you're a transphobic piece of shit.
Yeah,
Where
that's
it's
what I
like,
keep
but I'm
hearing.
gay. Like I don't want to be with someone with a penis. Like why is that not okay? Like that's literally the definition of like being a lesbian.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to do that anymore, or you're a turf.
Yeah. And I saw a piece from a lesbian woman who appears very masculine and was saying how she feels such an inner hatred coming from any trans identified people whatsoever because she's embodying sort of the proof that their thing isn't real because she's passing as like very masculine but she's a woman
Yeah.
and identify like she's just a woman and is like I can be a woman and be attracted to women and wear boys' clothes and whatever, and I'm still a woman. And she's just like that. They hate that.
Yeah. I do remember thinking like I feel like it was around 2013, 14, 15 that cult ideology really started to become more prevalent. And at that point, I was still in a relationship with a woman and identifying as a lesbian. And I did feel like there was this sudden like erasure of lesbians, that there was all this pressure for like butch lesbians to transition. And I think it's just gotten worse.
Crazy.
Yeah. But I know like even when my son was really little, he would say things like, I had friends who were trans, and he'd be like, Mama, that's just a girl, right? And it was like recognizing, like, oh, even his own inner, like, he knows. We're just like gaslighting our children into like going against what their inner knowing is.
We're trying. There's this way, and I think people hesitate to say this because it sounds mean, but there's this way that we're trying to make all these really weird people seem normal
Yeah.
and you're looked upon as the bad one if you're like that person's really weird. Like that's weird. They seem like they are just mentally ill. They have a lot of problems. But you're looked upon as the bad one. And I had there were two maybe they were like 20-year-old boys who came to do work in our yard a while back. And I remember like looking at these boys, they were huge. They were like so tall, almost as tall as Jordan. They must have been like 6'3", 6'4", whatever. They were tall and they were like big and muscular, just like normal young boys. And I looked at them and I was like, I wonder what it's like for them. It was just in my own head, but I was like, a lot of the kids their age I see walking around here are weird. They look weird.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at these two, like, very normal, I guarantee they're straight, just normal boys. And I'm like, what is it like for them? Like, I wonder what it's like nowadays.
Yeah. Just be a normal guy.
Yeah.
It probably all depends on where you live and the type of people you're around.
Well, totally. Right? We live in a super liberal place. But
Yeah, my son is most likely going to be, he's very tall. Like he's one of the youngest children in his class and he's one of the tallest. Um, we're guessing he'll probably be like 6'4". And it's interesting, even amongst his peers, like they look to him like an authority. But I also think it's like his really calming nature. Like he's a Taurus and
I
he's like, yeah, he's
yeah,
super grounded. He's like his temperament, he's super calm. Um, so like most of the boys in his class especially are like their energy is really frenetic and almost like manic. And he's like super like his chart, he's almost like he's mostly earth. Like he has so much earth. He's like super rooted and super grounded. And they're just like drawn to him. Like I'll go into his class sometimes and like the boys will all just be on his desk.
yeah.
And I know that like he just calms and grounds the rest of the kids. So I think between his height and his really calming temperament, the boys all like really are drawn to him.
I think that anxiousness you describe in the rest of them is this it comes from our culture.
I think it does too. And I
Because
feel like,
I think men are supposed to be more like your son.
yes, they are. I think he's more, his temperament is more like, he reminds me a lot of my dad as he's getting older. It's kind of funny. Like he doesn't talk a lot, especially when we're like in groups. But when he does, he's like hilarious. Like he says really insightful, funny things. And it's like, oh, I mean, growing up with sisters, like I didn't have brothers. I didn't really know like what, but I feel like he's more, I think that's almost like what magic he and medicine that he brings is like what traditional masculinity looks like and how it
It's
feels.
needed.
It's so needed.
I
And I
was just
think
saying this
he
to
brings
Jordan
that.
yesterday. Yeah, there's no real model of, I mean, there are some, but there's just not. And I think it's interesting. I've noticed this in myself recently is watching some of these conservative men. Now that I've started to follow a lot of these conservatives and kind of listen to what they say, um I noticed this thing happen in my body. Like I watched an interview with, I don't know if you know who Michael Knowles is.
Yeah.
He's like a, Christian conservative news, I don't know, guy. But I watched this debate where he did this thing where it's like him debating 25 LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
There's this
I
thing.
haven't watched it, but I've seen it floating around.
I watched it. It was really uh satisfying to me. Um But there was something about, and it's not just him, I've noticed this with quite a few of these guys. JD Vance is another one, where
Right.
like he's sitting there kind of he's well dressed. He's like in a suit or something, just like well dressed, well groomed. But he looks very normal man. He is talking in a very grounded way and saying very reasonable things. And I've noticed this like I just want all of these. I'm like, where are these men? I want them to come back and lead us places. Like,
Yeah,
can they just all be in charge of everything? Because
that's what we need.
that's how I feel when I watch them. There's this, and it's a little bit alarming how out of place now that feels, because we don't have that as much anymore. And I even think
Yeah.
back to my grandfather, this
Mm-hmm.
energy, like we don't have this masculine male man feeling
Yeah.
anymore. And when I watch these guys, I feel like relax. I feel myself relax in this way that I didn't know that I was missing.
Right.
Where I'm like, these guys are supposed to be in charge of things. What are
Yeah.
we doing? Put them back in charge. Just let them help us. Like,
Exactly. I know. I think like one of the I mean there are several reasons why I ended up voting for Trump. And like you know, back at his first election, like I cried. Like I was
yeah,
devastated. It like I was shocked. I was like, how could this happen? Oh my God. All our rights are gonna be taken away, blah, 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 you know, all the dramatics. And and then pretty much like because at the beginning of the election, I was backing RFK. Like he was my man. I was like, yes, I
yeah,
can totally get on board with him. Like I trust him. He he's amazing. And then when he backed Trump, I was like, oh, okay, this is like a thing that's happening. And then Tulsi Gabbard came on board, and then the assassination attempt happened, and then I had been listening to more conservative news media over the last few years, but I actually started to listen to Trump. Like I listened to his interview on Joe Rogan and was like, oh my gosh, like I'm an idiot. Of course I thought all these horrible things about him. Like all I ever heard was these like out of place snippets taken out of context that just weren't true. So I almost had to like go back and like re-listen to things that he had said and realize like, oh, this is what I was told that he said, but this is what he actually said. And when you listen to him more, you kind of start to understand that like, yeah, he's not always the most eloquent person, but when you listen to him long enough, you kind of get the gist of what he's trying to say. Like
yeah,
you kind of get, he doesn't use the most precise exact words, but you're like, oh, I see what he means. Okay, I get that. Like he's not calling for all these things that people are saying he is. He's not a horrible, racist, awful person. And
no,
then when he brought in JD Vance, that kind of like what sold it for me. That was what really did it. I had like watched the movie that they did with on his biography and um, was like, yes, like this is the type of person that should be in charge.
I didn't know they made a movie of his book,
Yeah,
of his memoir.
yeah.
Oh, we'll have to watch it. Jordan and
It's
I both read
really,
the book.
really good. Yeah, I really, really liked it. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like this man should be president. Like
Yeah.
he should literally be the next president. Like he's the perfect example of what it means to be an American. Like the
Mhm.
experiences he's had and what he's been through and like the relationship with his wife and his children, like it's so beautiful. And there's like no conversation around like I heard some interview when they were talking about well JD the only kind of babies that JD Vance wants are white ones. And I was like, his children aren't even white. Like what are you so just being able to recognize that no, most media how completely biased it is and it's just like it's just straight up lies like it's just not even true
It's
and
hard when you start to see, like, when you see even just one, like, blatant lie, then it really starts
it
to
unravels all of
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be like a committed NPR listener. Like I listened to NPR every day. And like what tripped it up for me was they did a story about sheriffs. And like I live in an area where we have a lot of sheriffs because there are a lot of unincorporated areas. And I've always had like I worked on a farm for a long time. I had a lot of, you know, interfacing with sheriffs. And they're amazing men. They're the best kind of cops, honestly. Like living in an area like this, like those are the ones that you can depend on. They're going to be fair. They care about they're usually from the communities that they serve. They care about people. They're elected by voters. It's not a position that's given by the governor. So it's the the community is electing their sheriff. And this NPR piece was talking about how so many sheriffs were, because a lot of sheriffs weren't willing to honor COVID like lockdown protocols. Like they weren't willing to arrest people essentially for breaking COVID rules. So this story was talking about like how problematic sheriffs are, because they actually consider themselves constitutionalists. They're like, we commit to upholding the Constitution. Like we answer to the communities who voted us in, and with upholding the Constitution. That's our job. So when ideology is trying to take over, and they see a group of people that aren't willing to play along, they were targeting sheriffs. And at the end of this piece, they were talking about revoking the right to elect a sheriff, and that it should be a position that's filled like by a government official. So in a state like California, that's deeply blue. I was like, oh, there's like anytime I hear someone say they want to take away one of our rights around voting, that's a red flag. And then it was like, it had me question all of the reporting I heard from then on, because I was like, no, we shouldn't take away our right to vote for our sheriffs. It's like when they were trying to change the makeup of the Supreme Court and make, terms shorter. It's like, no, there's a reason why these positions are the way they are. And so their ability to take that away made me question all of their reporting after that, because it just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Even just saying that you want to uphold the Constitution nowadays is seen as right-wing, which is a little bit scary.
Yeah, it's very scary, especially for the same people who are trying to claim that we're in a constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
But then they say the Constitution is, racist and horrible, and we just need to throw it away.
Yeah.
Like, well, if we don't have a Constitution, then we have nothing.
People don't get that. I don't think people really understand what they are trying to fight for.
No, especially when we're being taught. Well, now I heard recently that they're trying to say that the Holocaust happened because it was weaponized free speech.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, that's like next level crazy. Like, how do you get there? So if they're trying to convince us that free speeches can be weaponized to cause a Holocaust, there's so many problems with that.
Which is the opposite of what really happened.
Yeah.
But I guess it's like we don't care to really be accurate historically anymore either.
Well, I think that at this point they want justification for taking away freedom of speech.
Yeah, but I think there are the people who are doing that knowingly, but then there's so many other people who are just like, they're in this mindset and they just are like fighting for being morally good, what they think is morally good. And I don't think that they really fully realize, and you can hear it in the way that people, that's why I like listening to people debate certain points, and I think we need more of that. Like, we need to hear fully. That's why free speech is so important. We have to hear fully everybody's view so that then we can really start to understand who knows things and who doesn't.
Exactly. Because you can't actually like fully talk through any topic and see all sides of it, then I think then to the point, like, then it is easier to follow an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Because like any cult, as soon as you start to question it and see to its full end, it falls apart. So in order for it to even remain and to be upheld, you can't question it. Mm-hmm. So I think for any good society, there has to be an ability to question and to have conversations.
That's what I've appreciated about the conservative side is
Yeah.
that I have had people say like, "Oh, the right is so culty too," and I'm like, no, there are things wrong and, corrupt people on the right as well. But what I have seen largely from conservatives that I don't see from Democrats in our country is the willingness to like thoroughly question and answer questions and
Yeah.
talk about these things.
Yeah. And conservatives can have relationships with liberals.
Yeah.
Like when I worked on a farm and at that point was very liberal and everybody I worked with was extremely conservative, but they were all totally fine with the fact that I was married to a woman. They were fine, like they had no, we could talk politics and it was fine. Like
Yeah.
we could find common ground and we knew the things that we didn't agree with. But like I shared on Facebook after the election I had voted for Trump, and like it was
Yeah.
awful, like mostly because I wasn't really active on Facebook, and so most of the people I was friends with were from like queer poly communities, and I knew like they wouldn't want to like relate with me anymore. They wouldn't want to have any sort of a connection. So it was essentially like giving them the opportunity to unfriend me essentially or to cut me off because I knew that's exactly what would happen.
Yeah.
The comments, like they were awful. Someone accused me of having a brain tumor, of having long COVID. Um, and I was like, it was a very long post, and I was described like financially the reasons why I voted for Trump. I felt it would be better for the economy. Um, his support of Israel, that I knew that we were more likely to get the hostages back if he was in office. That I really truly believe that if he had been in office, October 7th never would have happened. There were a lot of, it was a lot. People like demonized me for like choosing my own financial security and that of my child. I was like, so I'm not allowed to vote for what's in the best interest of me being able to financially support my child. Like I was demonized for that. Like, I mean, it was awful, the stuff that people said in my comments. Um, and that to me, like that never happened. Like, I mean, I was in a relationship with my parents while they were Mormon. They were extremely conservative, and they never demonized me for my beliefs. Like, we always knew that we voted for different people, but we each knew that the other was doing the thing that they felt was best and right, and we trusted each other. Like when people started to tell me that I should cut off my parents because they had been Trump supporters from the beginning, I was like, that's ridiculous. I know why my parents voted for Trump. It makes perfect sense to me. It wouldn't make sense for them to vote for anybody else. Like I know who they are and I know what their values are, and of course, I knew why they made that decision, and I couldn't see it going any other way, and I didn't blame them for it. Um, but making everything about identity makes it personal. So then you can say, like, I was told, because I voted for Trump, I hated queer people, that I hated trans people, that I hated minorities,
Yeah.
because it now then becomes like this personal attack on other people rather
Which
than
it didn't used to
understanding, like,
be.
huh?
It didn't used to be that way.
No, it didn't used to be that way. Most of the time, nobody ever talked about who they voted for because nobody cared.
Yeah, and it didn't make you a horrible person.
Exactly, exactly. So I have found that I could be in relationship with conservative people, and even now, like there are still pieces that I don't agree
Yeah.
with conservative ideology, but they're more open to having me being in their group than the left, because in the left, if you're not 100% toe the line, as it constantly changes, like the metrics and the expectations are constantly changing, like words you can use, words you can't use. And if you don't follow and toe the line, you get canceled and kicked out, and they literally like eat themselves. So like now I work in a much more liberal um, workplace, and it's sad knowing like if I told them who I voted for, like they would hate me.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. You know what was really funny is when I put out my piece back in November that I voted for Trump, uh, I got the most unsubscribes for my list that I think I have maybe ever had. But what was amazing was that almost none of them, like when you have an email list, you can see what people click on, like if they click on a link or not. And almost none of them actually read my piece. And that was wild to me. It was like they opened it and they were just like, "Oh, she voted for Trump,
Yeah.
unsubscribe." But they didn't bother to read why or what I said.
No.
It was just an immediate I'm out. And I thought it was really fascinating. I actually didn't get any negative replies. I only got people leave. And somebody just sent me an email the other day. It was like the funniest email I think I've ever received, where she was like, Demetra, uh, like I'm trying to find your email. Can you send me the piece where you voted for Trump? She said, I'll never remember the quote exactly, but she was essentially like, I opened your email and I was so angry that I just deleted it immediately and I didn't read it. And she was like, are you sorry? Like she said, I saw your email where you said you came to America to vote for Trump and then left and went back to Canada, which I which I didn't do. I absentee voted. But she was like, you came to the States and you voted for Trump and then you went back to Canada. Do you regret it? Like, have you now, like, do you regret it? And are your friends around you suffering like negative repercussions? This was around the time I think Trump was threatening to like put tariffs on Canada. She was like, do you regret your decision? And also, can you resend me the piece? Because I want to read it. It's so funny. Because it was just like this, like, she was like, I was so angry and I just deleted it. And now aren't you mad? Like, you should regret what you did. And also, can you send it to me? Because I want to read it. And I was like, okay, this is exactly a microcosm of what having an online business is like. When you get that criticism, it's like people, they like hate you, but they love to hate you. And then they're like, please give me more of you.
Right. Yeah. It's
Some
wild.
some girl wrote a really mean comment on a I don't have this YouTube video up anymore, but it was a video I had put up a couple years ago. I think like 3 years ago or something. And I went to go delete it as I went to put up these new like podcast episodes. And I never want to look at YouTube comments because they tend to be so mean compared to other comments. But a one woman had commented a mean comment, and this woman commented like a year ago. And she just wrote the meanest thing, like, I can't stand the way you talk, and this is so annoying, and her blah, blah, blah. Like, all these very personal criticisms about me and the way I speak. But I was like, why are you? And I clicked on it, and I knew who it was because this girl used to be mean to me on when I was on Instagram, which I haven't been on in like a year. And I was like, why is this girl seeking out my videos that I didn't even put up recently to write mean comments? It's like, that's what it's like to be on the internet.
Yeah. People find you. They're like, they love to hate you.
Yeah. And it's very bizarre. It's like, but anyway, can you think of anything else? I feel like we touched on everything. Is there anything you wanted to say before we wrap up? Like anything else?
I was so glad when you shared about this podcast because I really do think these types of conversations are so important for people to have. I think so much we need to get back to actually having like one-on-one conversations with other people and finding our common experiences and our common ground and our common humanity. I think so much of what's happened over the last few years is like the devaluation of another person's humanity. And like when I was talking about Mormons, like I think it's important to understand like why people do what they do and have some compassion for the decisions that they make and to recognize like the positives. Like there's a lot that I value and that I'm grateful for around my experience of growing up. Like, my parents were really young when they started a family, and for them, having a church provided them with a foundation and with direction that they would not have had otherwise. Like, they wouldn't have really known how to properly raise a family, and having a church provided them with direction. And there was a lot of good that came out of that church. Like, I think it was a good thing that I was taught to be modest as a teenager. Like, I don't think it's a bad thing to cover our teenage girls' bodies and protect them from the male gaze. I think that's appropriate, and I think that's okay. And I think it's, especially in that time of like budding sexuality, it's better to protect that and to protect them. Like, I think we've gotten to this sense of now there's something bad about protecting children, and that just, it seems like evil.
Yeah.
Anything that is going to tell us that we shouldn't protect children or teenage girls from evil and from grown adults, like, I'm not on board with that. I was grateful that there was so much focus around families and children. Children were always part of everything that we did in church. Every aspect of church and every aspect of our lives involved babies and children. And I think so much culturally we've gotten away from that. And I'm grateful that like recently I heard like a debate over whether children should be invited to weddings or not. And I'm like, being Mormon, like, our weddings are full of children and babies. And I was like, when I got married, like, I wanted all my nieces and nephews to come. Like, it was really important to me for them to be there. Like, I love children. Like, I thought I was going to have a big family. I thought I was going to have like 4 or 5 kids. So I'm grateful that my foundation in my life involved community with a lot of kids. And that it's, I know how to have a life that can be child-centered. Like, I can be an adult and know how to center my world around my child. I think that's really important. And I'm grateful for the relationship that I have with my parents. And I'm grateful that we've all been able to kind of evolve together. And even when we've been like in different places, like during COVID, my parents ended up leaving the church because the prophet was advising everybody to get vaccinated. And my mom had prayed about it, and the answer she got was not to take the vaccine. And so it was like the first time in her life that the message that she got from God was different than what the prophet was telling her. And so her place right now is she's really in like a deconstruction phase and doesn't believe in anything. She's kind of thrown everything out. And it's been really interesting to find myself kind of coming back to Christianity at this point where my mother is kind of not believing in anything. But it feels nice for us to still be able to support and love each other as we're kind of walking in different places on this. And I think it's all the same path. I think we're just in different places on the same path. And I think the best thing I got out of that group that we shared was finding you and finding Jordan, and seeing your journey with leaving, because I know like you were much more like deeply in it and had a lot more contact with the woman who ran it. And it takes a lot of bravery to speak out about your experience, and I'm grateful that you did it, and I'm grateful I was able to witness that. So yeah, I think that's all.
Thanks. I think that I've been thinking a lot recently about the way we remember things and what we take from things. It's very important, the story that we tell around stuff. And I was just listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's had such an interesting life. I never knew it. Jordan would reference him sometimes, and then I've been we've been watching like his documentary and been listening to interviews with him, and Uh, Something he said about his childhood that really stuck with me is that his father was really abusive to him and his brother, and like he had a really awful childhood in a number of ways. But he said on this podcast, he was basically like, when he was talking about when he recorded that documentary was really the first time he had considered it or started looking back at it. And he said, I would say, like, my father beat us, and the interviewers would be like, oh, like, tell us more about that, or how did you feel? And he was like, it's weird because I don't think about the past that often. Like, I think about the future. And he said, uh, well, when I do think about my father, I remember him positively. Like, I remember these positive things that he gave me. And he said, and it's a good thing that he treated me as badly as he did, because otherwise I would have never left Austria and I never would have came to America. And so I think for ourselves, it's so important to have that perspective that you were just kind of giving of um, taking, like, remembering the positive things and not discounting the negative things or like pretending that they weren't there, but just we don't want to have the identity of how hurt we have been forever and all the things
Yeah,
that were wrong. It's good to form the identity around, like, I'm strong and look at all that I came through and all these positive things that came from these experiences.
exactly. And I think for me, like, I mean, I truly believe like the experiences I've had and I'm having are ones that my soul like chose for me in this life. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there was something that I needed to learn about honoring myself and honoring who I am that I learned in that big leap of leaving the church.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be who I am without that huge experience. And so I have, even though it was really hard, but even at the time I remember like self-talk of telling myself like, if you don't do this now, like the next life it's going to be harder. Like it's better to learn the lesson this time. So like pretty much every time I've had to go through like a big transition, I have to remind myself like it feels hard because your soul is doing like a lot of stretching. Like it's not bad because I think it's easy to feel like when you're in the midst of like a really big transition or change and it feels uncomfortable to assume like, oh, this must mean something's wrong and something bad is happening. And you really have, even after I've done it all, like I feel like I'm in the midst of a really big like transition right now, and I have to keep telling myself like I have to like talk to the human part of me of like it's okay. It feels uncomfortable because you're stretching and you're growing, but it's gonna be okay. Like everything's you're
And
not
I
dying. Like,
do think this was a huge turning point for me actually in healing, um, because, and it was around the time I picked up the Bible too. All these things happened at once last summer where the book I read actually was Shoe Dog. It was a Nike by the founder of Nike, his memoir. And for whatever reason, I read this book and it was a huge turning point for me because I was so sick. Like I was just like I could my all my joints, I could barely move. It was just like awful, and I just felt like I'd been trying all these things, but I wasn't getting anywhere. And it was really hard for me because all the health stuff got so much worse for me right when I left the cult. It was like it was just too much. It had hit, and other things stressful happened in my life as well at that time, and it was just way too much. And I think that I had this internal belief, like I had through being lost after leaving the cult, all this stuff. I had this belief that like things were going poorly because I had done something wrong. And I didn't realize, like, I read that book. I don't know what happened in what order. There were a lot of things going on at that time spiritually and what I was doing, but it was like, I remember reading this book, and the book is so filled with so many ups and downs constantly. And he had this crazy, beautiful journey. It's a very spiritual book, really, his path, like with creating Nike. But in reading this book, I was reminded what I used to know, which is like, oh, right, like this is just how life is. Like we have hard times and we have great times, and they're just part of life. And it doesn't mean that I'm doing life wrong. And that for me was like this unlock that then just felt like everything started going, it flowed, everything started happening. And it was really just about maybe like 4 months ago now, or 3 or 4 months ago, where I was like, oh, like God has been with me the whole time. Like I felt these past couple of years like I'm just lost and I'm in the dark and this is so hard and I have no connection with God. And I can now feel the love in all of that, where it was like He did not abandon me. He's just I needed to learn all of these things that I've learned in the past few years, and now I know where I'm going. But it's so hard to be grateful and trust that when you can't see the light at the end. Like you don't know where it's going, and you're just like, why is everything such a mess?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so much of it too is just a resistance to reality.
Yeah.
Like a resistance, like I don't like what's happening. I
Yeah.
want things to be different.
That's the cause of a lot of our pain, isn't it? Yeah. It's like who says someone I talked to says, how do you know it should be happening? Because it is happening.
Yeah.
The end.
Yeah. So I've been in, yeah, in like a liminal kind of dark growth place right now that's like not pleasant, uncomfortable, but I have to keep reminding myself like, okay, what's the lesson here? Like what am I supposed to learn? Like it's happening. I can't change it. Like how can I keep being kind and loving to myself through it? Because that's another thing I recognized is like I'm generally like not really all that nice to myself. Like my own inner dialogue is actually quite punishing and mean. Um, and if I, want to start dating and find like an outer masculine that's going to be kind and loving, like I have to start with myself.
Mhm.
Like I have to be willing for my own inner masculine to be kind and loving first because mine is not. It's quite mean and not at all good. So that's I'm
So
like,
there's also, I think, the acceptance of that,
yeah,
right? Because then if we resist that, then we get into an extra spiral of like my inner dialogue should be loving and it's not, and that's a whole other resistance. And so like
exactly. Yeah,
we have to feel ourselves separate from the ego and be like, oh my, the ego is being very mean. Okay, the end. Now what? Like,
yeah. No,
I'm gonna pay
that's
attention to nice thoughts instead.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of it, like, it's funny because I think through this journey, like, I've, my appreciation for my father has grown so much. So I think it was easy as a child to, like, kind of take it for granted. Like, I feel like I'm lucky. I feel like not everybody grows up with a good father. Like, I had a good father. I have a good father. He was always willing to work hard to make sure that we were taken care of. Like, he like watching his relationship with my mother, like the way he holds her in her kind of chaos in her, feminine chaos is actually like quite beautiful and something I wasn't able to see before. Um, and the way he just like we go camping as a family every year, and I think this was the first year I was actually like paying attention to what he was doing. Like as a child, it was just kind of like dad was doing his thing and I was being a kid, but recognizing like, oh, he's setting up the trailer and now he's chopping the firewood and he's doing all of these things to like provide for me and my son and my siblings and my mother to hold us and like care for us and protect us like while we're away from home and recognizing like how much work that actually is. Like
A
it's
lot
so
of
much
what
work.
men do goes unnoticed.
It really does. And I think I really started to notice it when my son was born. And I was essentially the parent who worked outside of the home. Like I was supporting us financially and taking care of us. And I remember like calling my dad, like crying, like, thank you. Like
Yeah.
there was four of us. Like he had my grandparents lived with us. He had four daughters and my mother, and he took care of all of us. I'm like, that is so much work. Energetically, to hold that many people all the time, it's so much work. But he loved it, and he loves being a father. He loves being a father. He loves being a grandfather, and it's felt really nice to recognize those pieces of what the masculine does, and especially for a man who knows how to do it well and does it like without any, like he doesn't go chop the wood and it's like, hey jerk, I just like did all that stuff and nobody even noticed. You know what I mean? He's just back there doing all the things. And it's definitely changed our relationship because I think he can feel that I can see it,
Yeah.
even if I don't say anything.
Yeah. That does a lot for men. And they don't get it really anymore typically in our culture. When my parents went through their divorce, I was older. I was like in my early 20s when they divorced, but my mom would go, and she did this when I was young too, but she would go on about how like your father never did anything. He never did anything around the house and he was never out. And uh at the time I sort of just went along with her like worldview.
Yeah.
She was my mom. But now I'm like, he worked all the time. What do you mean? What do you mean he wasn't doing anything? He was paying for our lives.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And I do think that that has gotten to the point where that's so discounted.
Yeah, it's
It's not
not
on.
valued in the same way.
Yeah. It's like we have to value both sides. Like we have to value, like my mom was a stay-at-home mom with us kids. Like it was important to value the contribution that she made to the family and taking care of us. And it was equally as important to like value that my father, like as the parent, like when my ex-wife carried my son and gave birth, like when he was 2 weeks old and I had to go back to work, that was really hard. And then like recognizing like, oh, it's not
Like,
easy for dads either to have to leave their babies and have to go back to work to make sure that we can pay the rent and buy food. Like I'm sure my dad would have loved to have been able to spend more time with us when we were babies, but like he couldn't. Somebody has to be working.
yeah. Yeah, it's another interesting thing in what people are choosing nowadays because I've seen too, like, and this obviously wouldn't go for everyone, but I've just seen a lot of couples around my age who both of them are working. They're both bringing in like a substantial income, and then they make a lot of lifestyle choices because of those double incomes.
Yeah.
But then it ends up like once they have kids or that whatever, then to keep up their lifestyle, they have to both be working, which then is taking them away from the kid. And I've just started to wonder, like Jordan and I have had a lot of conversations about this of just like, what's our main value really? And do we really want to be living, like I think we actually want to be living, um, what's the term? Just like uh spending way less than we need to.
Yeah, be more frugal.
It's I don't know. I can't think of the phrase that we living below your means.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
just like I see a lot of our friends, a lot of people choosing to like have all these top things, but then it's like you're always like you're losing stuff in other areas of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
I think yeah, it goes back to what are we really valuing and modeling in society in general. Is
Exactly.
it women having top careers or is it like your family and time with your family is more important than how much money you're making?
Yeah, I fully agree. If I had my choice, like like when we had my son, like I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and homeschool my kids. Like that's what I'd always wanted, and it didn't end up working out that way. Um, but I feel like we we ended up choosing to put him in a Waldorf school, which I think is like the second best. Like homeschooling would be the best, but at least I feel like he's in an environment that honors him like as a whole person, and is a really really good fit for him. Like he's really thrived at his school. Um, but if I had the choice, I would rather, you know, be home with baking and teaching him myself. Like that would feel really sweet, and that would be my main value. I think is there's like, especially as an older mother, my son was born when I was 36. Like there's only so much time that I'm going to have with him
Yeah.
between like when he grows up and moves away, and you know, his childhood, even though it feels long, it's really not. And I want to like put as much like love into him as I can while I can.
Yeah.
Like that's my biggest value.
Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all this with
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you. This was really fun.